Hello, everybody. It's so good to see your faces, many friends and lovely people that I know. So let me start with just a few technical things. Actually, I'm going to hand over to Mark, and Mark, I will take over the letting in people in the meantime.
Perfect. Hello. So a couple of things. While we are running this conference, we will be live streaming on YouTube. So if you have an issue with your image being seen somewhere, please disable your camera now. We will also be recording, so same is applicable there. Second, if you disable your camera, we would ask everyone to actually disable their camera while the speakers are speaking and while Nadia is on screen. And to only then view our speakers, you can go into the window you have of a disabled camera. You get 3 little dots on the top right, and if you press on that, you have a button that says Hide Non-Video Participants. This will basically disable all the little name plates you have everywhere, so you only see people who have their camera on. And that's why we ask you to also turn your camera off then at the same time. Instructions are in the chat again in case you need to review how that works, or you can directly write me in the chat as well to the host. All right.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So with that being said, I will now officially start the recording of today's session. And yeah, give you a little bit of a welcome and intro into our time here today. So just very quickly, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nadezhda Taranchevsky, or Nadia in short. I'm one of the co-founders of Conscious You, and we're specialized in facilitating collective transformation through our scalable online coaching programs. And ever since meeting Peter Koenig some 15 years ago, and Peter's on the call here today as well. Hi, Peter. I will bring you in at a later point. I've been fascinated with money and co-wrote the CU Money online program with Peter that supports people to do what they love with and without money. And the Money Talk series that we're here for today was actually created as part of an initiative that Peter started. So we are currently preparing for a big congress that helps to bring more love into business. And that is aimed at really making sure that the bottom line is moving away from money and moving towards love. And this congress is happening in April, with a big online portion, of course, and I will ask Peter to say a few words about that later. But basically, what we're doing here today is part of creating a more conscious conversation about all things money from different angles. And so today, our plan is the following. I will quickly introduce our two speakers, Stephen the Millionaire and Alessandra Solberger. And once I have introduced the two of them, they will give a bit of an opening statement that just sort of summarizes, as much as you can do that in 3 minutes, who they are as a person. And once that has happened, we will move into an interview section where I will interview the two of them for about 20, 25 minutes before then turning the interview over to this entire group here. And what I would love for us to just note is Mark, our IT specialist, will actually close the chat for the duration of the first interview section here now, because I want us to be fully present for and with our guests. And actually, my experience is that instead of posting your question in the chat, I would really love it if you could just raise your hand electronically, and we can explain later how that works, so that we can actually have a real face-to-face or at least voice-to-voice interaction that just makes it more lively than reading of the chat. However, if for any reason you cannot talk, then of course you're more than welcome to also post your question into the chat. Yeah, so that's our quick setup for today. And so let me introduce Alessandra. So Alessandra Solberger founded her first business at only 11 years old. And Alessandra, you have to later disclose what kind of a business that was. I'm very curious. It doesn't say anywhere. And you've been investing in blockchain and biotech sectors since graduating from Oxford in 2012. And after covering a product in early stage technology startups, you have worked in private equity, and you're currently the youngest member of your Oxford Degrees Advisory Board. And of course, you founded Top Tier Impact, which is a global private network of impact investors and impact entrepreneurs. Top Tier Impact. Welcome, Alessandra.
Thank you so much, Nadia.
Great.
Glad to be here.
So let me quickly introduce Stephen, and then we go to your opening statements. So Stephen, the millionaire, is, and this is, by the way, if you read his name, I would have completely mispronounced his name. I probably still did, but it's apparently with a strong North American focus. So not a Flemish focus, for example. But Stephen, so happy to have you. You're founder of Complementary Currency Resource Center. You're fellow at Coin and advisory board member of the New Money Systems Group at the Lifeboat Foundation. And you've been working with complementary currency systems for the past 20 years or so, starting first in Canada, and then, if I got this correctly, in at least 9 other countries. So I'm very happy to have you here today, Stephen. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Good day, everyone.
Yeah, so I would love to turn over to Alessandra and just give you a moment to say a bit something personal about yourself so that people know who we're dealing with.
Sure. Thank you, Nadia. Yeah, so for those who try to place my accent, yeah, I was born and grew up in Switzerland, so a little bit of a mix of languages and cultures in my background. I've had this mix of, very active, like sports background growing up and a lot of curiosity. Nadia, you were asking me about the business. So I started selling my books and toys. And then it became a thing for like classmates. And it was really fun. I was 11. I was like, I love doing this. It just somehow happened. Yeah.
I love it. It's also, Alessandra, if I could just go in there for a moment, that's also the first sign of sort of sustainability, right? So instead of
oh wow, I never
away.
Absolutely, you got it. Very nice, very nice. Yeah, and maybe just to jump all the way and talk about impact and sustainability, the way that I approach the impact investment space, I realized a few years ago that I had been angel investing in some areas that are considered to be under the impact umbrella. But at the time, I wasn't totally familiar with it. I was like, oh, okay, so like, let me look more at the impact investment space. And I have a background in system design, like, just thinking through things from a systemic perspective. It's been a thing since I was a little kid, actually, like thinking about, economy, how things work, figuring out the world. And so when I looked at the impact investment space, I thought, wow, there's so much amazing stuff happening in here, but we could create more collaboration, more synergies, like more connecting the dots and advance this space better and faster, which feels like a better paradigm for society and for our world. And so that was really at the genesis of TTI.
Great. Thank you so much for the intro. And maybe if you allow me to ask you one more slightly more personal question even, can you tell us, because I'm always fascinated about sort of the monetary background of our speakers and how you were raised, sort of what was the mindset with which you grew up and how does that also feed in what you do today?
Yeah, it's interesting because, so obviously growing up in Switzerland, Switzerland in general is very affluent, right? And I grew up with a lot of sort of like a push for education and knowledge around me. And I remember that when I started traveling really early on, but it wasn't until I became a teenager and I was in Brazil. I'm actually Swiss Brazilian. And I was, but I've just visited it. And I was traveling through Brazil, and Brazil is a very different country from Switzerland. So it goes from extreme wealth to extreme poverty. And so, with my family, we went on this road trip to see other parts of Brazil. And I remember seeing rural Brazil and how different it was. And then getting back to Switzerland and just looking at the streets and the houses and just going like, I feel like I'm in a dollhouse. This just doesn't feel real. And, and this is the perspective, like, growing up in a family that does well in Switzerland, a country that does well in general. and starting to see the world through the eyes, like not just of a child that is a certain perspective, but really starting to grow up and thinking like about the differences, right? And I remember that really stayed with me, because I was kind of like, I was always about the word in a way, and I had an international background, but it started to make me really reflect, right, of the perspective that I had about that, and about like, how an economy does and how a lifestyle is, and how it really is spread across the world.
Thank you. Yeah, and I can relate to sort of, it takes an outside perspective to actually even become aware of what it is that you have and how you were raised, right?
Yeah.
And the affluence all around us. Thank you, Alessandra. We'll get back to you in a moment. So, Stephen, I'd love to hear a bit about yourself.
Yes. Well, I've been living in Indonesia the past 20 years, in Asia nearly 25 years, and I came originally from Canada. And let's see. Well, you introduced me earlier on, so what would you like me to talk with you about?
Well, a bit more sort of personal about you as well. So, for example, also like Alessandra, tell us a bit about how you were growing up. What was your relationship with money that you've learned maybe from your parents? How that influences what you're doing today?
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in a family where I had to work to contribute to earning money for the family from a very young age. And but what all around us were people who were willing to help us. And so there was a lot of cooperativism, and my mother was involved in a food cooperative that reduced the price of food and so on for working class families in Canada. And I think growing up around the food cooperative and a few other organizations when I was growing up introduced me to ways that people can be wealthy without needing to have money. And so I think I became involved in the credit union and cooperative movement in Canada as a result of that, and then came across complementary currencies through that experience as well. Yeah, so I think that's exactly what I'm exploring in my work in complementary currencies and now blockchain technologies, is how we can be wealthy and support each other and achieve other social and economic outcomes without having to have money.
Yeah.
If we do, that's great too. I mean, there's a lot that can be done once you do start learning how to create real wealth.
Yeah.
And that's an important part. But I think I've enjoyed a lot of it. Generating that wealth collaboratively with other people.
Yeah. And I think it goes beautifully actually with what I talked about earlier, sort of the intention for the Congress that is going to happen in April, right? Where the whole idea is, how do we move from a bottom line of money to a bottom line of love, and help people all over the globe to do what they love with and without money, right? And the with money is obviously where Alessandra also comes into play, and sort of her top tier investment people, and people who have money and who want to bring something different to the world. And it shouldn't be limited to people with money to contribute and to help and to support one another. Stephen, if you had something like one dream for the world, how would you describe that?
That's pretty hard. I have quite a few of them, but I would say it would be for people to be more authentic and relating with each other, and I found that practice to have really improved the quality of my relationships.
Thank you. Alessandra, were you going to add something to that? Or did you like to go on?
Yes. I'll tell you a story, actually. Last month, so Stephen, I didn't realize that we share definitely blockchain technology. I came across it first in 2012 at Oxford, and because I have a background in governance, tech, and finance, and it's been a ride since then, and it still feels very early days, very exciting times for what this technology can do as a fabric for how our society operates. And so, Nadia, I find it very, very impactful, to say the least. So I'll tell you a story. Last month, so I'm in Asia, I'm in Thailand, and I was in the north, and I was in the city in the north where there's a whole community of blockchain developers, like Ethereum developers, like developing all these apps. And I went to one of the meetups. We had dinner afterwards. And one of them at some point stopped, like in a very serious way, and asked us all, you see, guys, I really wonder most days how to make sure that I spend most of my time in value creation and not in value capture. And he just touched my heart right there. I was just so excited. I was like, this is why I love this sector, because there is so much actually of that kind of talent, you know, that thinks about these things. And for me, to answer your question, this is what I'd love to see. I'd love to see a world where everybody is enabled by design or by conditions and by, you know, by how things are inside ourselves and outside, to spend their time in value creation and not in value capture, to spend time doing things out of their genius and not out of, you know, like necessity, doing things that they don't like. And so a world where everybody can be naturally operating where they're meant to be and where they want to be. Yeah.
Mm. That's beautiful. It seems like we have a good overlap between visions, and I'm assuming with a lot of people who are on this call today as well. So, and actually, Alessandra, on that note, maybe if you could for a moment, since you're coming and you invest a lot of your time in the impact investment space, just in a nutshell, what's the difference then between people who take their money and do philanthropy and people who actually do impact investment?
Yeah, so philanthropy in effectively the non-for-profit word and the word of foundations is one area. Impact investing really goes into investing, right? So in other words, it's not like there is philanthropy and then there's a part of it that is impact investing. No. There is this part of the investment space that is impact investing. And what's happening is this, okay? So impact investing is going mainstream. And this is what is already happening with ESG investing on public markets. So ESG is like environmental, social, governmental principles. It's becoming a hygiene factor for public companies. The regulation is catching up with it, right? And on top of it, the performance data of financial returns on public markets shows that ESG stocks outperform normal stocks, right? And so in other words, I think it's very important to put impact investing here because, and not sort of, where's the difference in here, right? It's here because this is about investing in the future and not in the past. This is about looking forward and, you know, active out of like a positive space as opposed to looking backwards and acting out of a fear of like how are we adjusting to it. And so, you know, to me, ultimately, these are, you know, within impact, and we can talk about like what impact really is more concretely, you know, but within impact, like we just see the shift of various economic sectors towards a sustainable and equal paradigm. And really, you know, that's where the world is going, I believe.
And on that note, because, you know, one thing I listened to another talk of yours, and one thing that came up there was the question around greenwashing, right? So impact and sustainability and purpose, and, you know, they're all of these buzzwords now. So you being in the impact space with your group, how do you guys actually make sure that you deliver what you sort of propose, what you preach?
Yes, excellent question, Nadia. So I actually see ourselves as a top-tier impact as performing a role for the sector in creating this accountability of real standards, real measurability, right? Like real stuff. Yeah. So as I like to say, I call it impact without the BS and without the greenwashing, effectively, because it's great that now impact is growing so much. It's also inevitable that greenwashing happens. And so it's up to stakeholders in the ecosystem like ourselves to help in bringing that accountability to the table.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, you have a strong vision with TTI and what you want to achieve. And you already talked a bit about the kind of world that you would like to co-create with, for example, your fellow impact investors. And to make a link also between you and Stephen, how does blockchain technology figure into this space?
Who is the question for?
For you right now. I'll get to Stephen in a moment.
Right. Yes, Stephen, it'll be all yours afterwards. But yeah, I love when people connect the dots on this. So in the evolution of humans in the natural kingdom, at some point we started observing our thoughts. And we invented utensils, which then became weapons. We invented technology. we effectively found a way to bypass the system and put ourselves all the way on top of the food chain. And along this journey, we invented concepts like justice, trust, right and wrong. All of this stuff does not exist in the natural kingdom, in nature. These are man-made concepts. And while it's incredible that we've invented these concepts and how much they've helped us evolve, right? They've been at the fundamental layers of what we've built up to this day. We suck at implementing all of this. Our justice system, like our, even the way that like regulation, like sustainability regulation, I see it right now, how it gets implemented, right? Like we have this world that still doesn't have checks and balances full in place, like nature actually does, because nature has checks and balances, right? If you think about lions and gazelles in the savannah, they evolve in parallel. One gets faster, the other gets faster. If lions suddenly had technology and weapons, they would start catching all the gazelles and kill themselves in the process. Yeah, and this is kind of what we are doing right now, but on a global level. And it's very tough to connect the dots and see what's going on, right? And be like, okay, well, we're out of balance. And so I believe that this technology represents a step change in how we can go about justice, trust, right and wrong, and overall measurability of the system that we interact in.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm actually going to hand it over right to Stephen and hear sort of your take on what Alessandra just shared.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. I'm very much in agreement. I think it's really amazing that this technology was developed and introduced with the support of the open source software movement. And it's given us the ability to create money that's as powerful and as controllable as the one that preceded it. The one that we see, like euros and dollars and so on, that are either on their way out or on their way into transitioning into blockchain-based currencies. So it's been fascinating to see this process at work, and I think it does relate very much to previous processes that have gone on in human society before this. The process of decentralization and democratization, from moving from gods to emperors to kings to parliaments and the next stages that will be coming after that.
Yeah. To go take this a little bit deeper, to be completely transparent with both of you, like I knew very little about blockchain and Bitcoins and alternative currencies before setting up this talk, which is one of the wonderful side effects of doing this, because it actually forces me to read up on some of the stuff that I don't know anything about. And if I understand this correctly, and you can of course, correct me afterwards, so digital currencies such as, for example, Bitcoin, they rely on an underlying technology that is called blockchain. And the blockchain records every transaction made in identical copies on a so-called digital ledger that is shared amongst different users, right? Is it correct so far? Great. Okay, so then a currency like Bitcoin, if I understand this correctly, is actually an under-permissioned ledger, which means that the purpose of an under-permissioned ledger is to allow anyone to contribute data to the ledger and for everyone in possession of the ledger to have identical copies, right? So therefore, again, if I understand this correctly, that's the reason why Bitcoin doesn't have a single owner, right? So or indeed it can't be owned by any one particular person or government. And this creates something amazing, to your point of the democratization, because it creates a censorship resistance, which means that no single actor can prevent a transaction from being added to this ledger. And participants maintain this integrity of the ledger by reaching a consensus about its state. But because they're not controlled centrally, blockchain-based currencies also pose a challenge to institutional power structures and existing industries. So I would love to know sort of what's your take on that? And I'm going to start with you, Stephen, because I can see the potential, but I can also see the risk that poses.
Right, absolutely. Usually instead of under permissioned, we say public, just public blockchains. Okay. That's totally fine. And permissioned are ones that require, that are private or controlled in some way, or created by a private entity. For example, JP Morgan has a private currency, and we call it permissioned. And yes, while amazing, and we're in this transition period right now. Of course, a lot of people have heard about blockchain in the last 2-3 years, and now we're in another wave right now of a lot more people hearing about it because it's in the news and the mainstream media and the non-mainstream media, and everyone seems to know someone now who's been involved in it for a short time or for a long time, and that's an important part of the process. Just as it took us, it takes some people gravitate towards Zoom using this platform right away, and other people take a little bit longer to get used to it, and some people become frustrated by the changes that they make to it and decide to not use it and use something else instead, such as Skype or whatever. And I think that we're seeing this natural process play out of technology adoption with blockchain currencies. I don't mean Bitcoin in particular, because it's really like the choo-choo train of blockchain technologies now. And now that it's 11 years old, something like that, and the technology is therefore dated, and it doesn't update very easily, and it uses a lot of energy in order to confirm and secure the network, compared to new blockchain technologies that have been developed. And so I don't see Bitcoin as particularly raising many challenges with the existing financial system. In fact, they seem to be quite a lot in alignment, because it is a bit of it's a bit of a money game, you could say. And that's the direction that Bitcoin is going, and will probably be staying in for a very long time. Whereas the other blockchain technologies, for example, Ethereum, the number 2, is at the very early stages of an explosion in decentralized financial applications, which would allow people, for example, here in Indonesia, to access financial services provided by people in Switzerland or in Germany, without having to rely on the Indonesian financial system to provide those services, or even to provide oversight to them. And while that carries some risks, I'm very optimistic that will result in a great improvement in the provision of financial services and financial inclusion to people in Indonesia. I'm often asked to give talks on that, and there are tens of millions more Indonesians who have a smartphone than have a bank account. And so if we look at it that way, then we can see the immense possibilities that are coming up in just the next few years of being able to provide access to these financial services in a way that's very secure and transparent, and governable by the users of that platform as well too, which is really amazing. So we don't just have to say, oh, why did Mark Zuckerberg do this, or why did some CEO of a technology company do this or that, and I don't like it. And these structures are going to allow us to participate collectively in the intelligence of how that platform unfolds. And I find that just really, really fantastic. And it's something that is going to pose challenges for governments in terms of regulation, and in terms of dealing with the negative effects of how people use money. Just as they do with the negative effects of how people use the regular money and the regular monetary system.
Yeah.
And but at that point, we may also be exploring different ways of funding government systems, and that may change the way that governments are structured. So it's part of that natural process that we don't necessarily need to have presidents and prime ministers, just determining how big the budget for the army is going to be or something like that, because people in other countries might not be in agreement with it.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. But I'm interested also in Alessandra's take on that, because my comment previously about the potential risk in this blockchain technology, then maybe even went more into the direction of who is this a risk for, right? And if you are interested in maintaining the status quo, then something that is out of your control can certainly not be in your interest. So we're then quickly reaching a very political stage, and also policymaking stage. And Alessandra, I'd be fascinated to hear your take on that.
Ultimately, there is a shift in consciousness that needs to happen to truly align with a technology that is about collective value maximization, and not just about finding through game theory, through, like a system that still allows for individual profit extraction or profit maximization. And so, I think that it's a dance, because you can't, on one side, you can't be like, okay, let's advance ourselves, right? And, we'll be so enlightened, we'll know better, right? And then we don't have a system, and the other way around. And so, I'm interested in observing the practicalities of that dance, right? And how it reflects. And, like try to bring things forward. So for me, for instance, right now, I'm about to publish a book called Blockchain Mavericks, where I put together interviews with the main names in crypto globally, from behind the main currencies and projects, but really just to talk about how this technology represents a real paradigm shift in how all our economic sectors operate, and how our countries operate, and in a very concrete way, So I made them talk about things that journalists usually don't make them talk, because I know a lot of these guys from like these past years, I know they think about that, right? Just back to my example of like value creation versus value capture. A lot of these guys have really this kind of ideology, at their core. It's just that we love to talk about Bitcoin prices, and that is the kind of stuff that the news loves to cover. But yeah, so for me right now, it comes down to education, but it comes down to education in a practical way, because what I noticed among my friends in TTI is that, smart people read the books for sure, right? And so they read a couple of books, and then they'd be like, and they know that, I've been in the space, and they're like, I read something, but I still don't quite understand it. And so I want to make it practical. So the book really is a Trojan horse. It's got a tokenized community around it. It's a Trojan horse for people to get a crypto wallet, more specifically one that can live in your browser, so that you can start accessing applications as well in the blockchain ecosystem, and be part of it for real, and see how it looks like and how it works. And it's still very clunky, I would say. It's still very early days, like the early days of the web, where things looked absurd. But I think that this is an important move, because that's how smart people can suddenly put it in the concrete context of what they do, and then, leverage the fundamentals that this technology delivers to improve their sectors.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up, because that actually links nicely to the first money talks that we had, where Bildung, which is a holistic approach to education that came out of the Nordics. We discussed how important that is, and how absurd it is that money influences so many aspects of our life, but it's never really taught or spoken about. I don't remember in school ever being taught anything about money or the financial system. So this sort of sense of agency in dealing with that was never established, and I'm now sort of clawing my way into that, and it with great discomfort. So I have a two-pronged question for either one of you. The first one is, because you talked about a necessary shift in consciousness, right? You said if we need to basically move away from maximizing my own profit and accumulating all of these assets in my own accounts and keeping them safe there, to a collective focus and one where money can flow. So my question is, what kind of a consciousness shift is that? And also, do you expect that is something that can go over peacefully, or are we looking at revolutions in different places? So either one of you, both of you.
I can start. Yeah. If we're talking about the consciousness shift from an inner perspective, to go right there, I think it just comes down to realizing how collective consciousness really is, just connecting with that, and everybody can have their own experiences about that in different ways. And then when it comes to our systems, yeah, like I was saying before, it's a shift of starting to implement it from various corners. So the way that I see it is, for example, when companies like PayPal start doing what PayPal did, right? In October, they announced like, we are integrating crypto. You're going to be able to buy, hold, sell, and most importantly, you're going to be able to translate your balances. So in other words, like, you can take in crypto and then have fiat, right? So USD or whatever else. And so that is a big deal, right? Because it solves for the problem of like, yeah, and then I just have crypto in there. How am I going to, there's not much that I can pay for if I'm a little merchant. And so what happens with these companies starting to like push the envelope is that all the other companies go like, hold on a second, right? And it's a virtuous cycle at some point, right? And it accelerates itself. Ironically, this is how networks work and operate as well, you know, in like consensus mechanisms of blockchain protocols. But so what starts happening is that you have companies going like, oh, okay, that's good. Like, you know, our colleagues are doing it. Then at some point there's 2 or 3 of them doing it. And it's more like FOMO, right? It's like, are we missing the boat? Like, we better get in. So I've started to see this happening in the space, and that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. So there is actually a shift that could be driven, if you want, by even financial interests of big global players who don't want to miss a boat. Okay. Stephen, what are your thoughts on the question of consciousness and sort of peaceful transitions into this approach, or non so peaceful transitions?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start with the good news then. I think very peaceful. I think, we have allowed governments to have control over the implementation of violence against other peoples and other countries for too long. And I think it's something that we may be coming close to being able to put an end to. And I think we'll need to do that to get over some of the obstacles that we have facing us right now, and also coming up in the near future with climate change and adaptation to climate crisis, which is something that I work with in the side as well too. So that part's the really good news. And yes, while the applications are really clunky, they've come such a long way from how they've been. So for me, the consciousness is not necessarily in that sort of spiritual sense so much. Of course, that may be there for some people, but I'm seeing it as people can now afford to own a smartphone. They see their friends able to send money in seconds for pennies around the world, and they're able to participate in the global economy in a way in which their own national banking system may be preventing them, and the way that and seeing ways that they can bypass the global structure that keeps the third world and doesn't allow people to progress. And so there are people who are looking for those tools. They've also had some exposure to, through travel or through friends living in other countries, to those kinds of opportunities, and realize that they now have direct access to them. So I think it's like what Andrew was talking about with the network effect is also happening between people as well too, and that they will say, well, whether or not they feel the last US election was transparent or not, they can say, well, look, Thailand and other countries are starting to implement blockchain-based voting systems where transparency is absolutely guaranteed, and transparency in voting. And so that we will see more and more governments doing that as well too, in order to be sure that they're delivering honest representation to their constituents. And I think that will also lead to that kind of applications that are non-monetary, that they have, so cryptocurrencies can be used in many ways that give value to information and not just as a monetary value. I think we've made that clear already. So that I think that that is going to become easier and easier for people to be able to use. And it is still very early days and still clunky and rough right now. But that's why I agree with Alessandra in encouraging people to download the MetaMask app, or that allows you to do quite a few different things, and to learn about these applications that are coming up. Because in the next 1 to 2 years, early in March this year, there was $3 billion in DeFi, and now it's 30 or 35. It's the amount of money that's moving into the platform it's into the whole ecosystem is very rapid. And in the next 2 years, we will see, this go to scale in a way that could make Bitcoin just look like this big, and what we're talking about could be far larger.
Yeah.
But it's not about money games and making profits and just capturing value, but actually just providing the capital needed to be able to provide these services to people in Nigeria, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, South America, Central America, and so on.
And by the way, if either of you have any links to specific apps or something that you think people should be aware of, then please post them in the chat so we can access them. Before I have another question for you, Stephen, I also want to say something about the consciousness piece, because I do agree fully with both of you that accessibility is a huge topic, and the education piece or the Bildung piece around even being aware of what's out there and what the options today are is huge. And we need to find a way to educate children at a very early age about the options that they have, and sort of use maybe even their playfulness in a positive way to get engaged with the financial system and not see it something as outside of themselves. And because though there's, for many people, as there was for me for many years, the split between money and finance is something that's far away from me. I don't have any control over it. I don't understand it. It sort of actually creates constriction and fear. I do think there's a role for the consciousness piece that goes, whether you want to call it spiritual or not, for me, it's actually deep psychological work. And that's what I understood once I met Peter Koenig and was introduced to his money work. And there's, a number of colleagues also part of the core team for organizing the upcoming Congress here on the call today, who are all working towards the same goal, which is helping people to understand their personal relationship with money, which is very often based deep in our family's history, to disentangle any projections that we have on money in order to free ourselves to be free with money, to heal this relationship with ourselves, heal a relationship with money, and be able to engage with it in a way that doesn't mean we're replicating the old shadow in the new system. Right. So I would actually want to put a stake in the ground for also that part of consciousness work here. But Stephen, before I hand over to our participants, one last question, because part of what you've been doing is build alternative currency systems, whether they are digital or cryptocurrencies or not. And I'd love for you to give maybe one or two examples of communities where you've seen that make a positive impact.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, okay. There's a lot of communities that, so I've started with working with complementary currencies in 1991 in Canada, and worked with a few different communities across Canada, all the way to Toronto, and some in Europe. I was involved with the Social Trade Organization in Utrecht, and now with the Coin Foundation, which shares operations between Holland and Portugal, and have some members of my team that are also participating in this chat. But around 1995, I became much more interested in the application of these currencies in third world countries, in Mexico City and in Argentina and in Thailand and Indonesia and East Timor and Senegal. So I would say, for a couple of examples, one was the Red Global de Trueque in Argentina, which was operating from about 1997 to 2004. And at the time, although the peg of the Argentinian peso was still pegged to the US dollar, people could see what was coming a few years away, and started to create their own barter markets using a printed currency called an arbole. And so when I visited them in 1999, I was in marketplaces with thousands of people with no Argentine pesos being transacted, and a full range of goods and services, from dentists and doctors to car repair to food and restaurants and so on. And there were 21 markets operating using only these currencies in Argentina in 1999. However, by 2003, the peg completely ripped. There was no longer a par value between the US dollar and the Argentine peso. And then millions and millions of Argentine people wanted to join this platform and start using arboles instead of using Argentine pesos. And the organization that was managing it just couldn't handle the volume of new people coming in. There wasn't enough money. There wasn't enough administrative support. The government didn't know what to do. So it eventually ceased to function at that scale, and went back to being just a small, that went through a crisis of confidence. People left it, and then it just now functions today as a network of small community exchange systems as it started out as it started out with.
Okay, so it still exists actually.
It still exists, but just as a shadow of its former self. And there's a story there, and lesson learned that we need to pay attention to about moving quickly and making sure that you have your resources in place to handle the growth that could be coming. If the conditions were to align themselves in such a way that you're all of a sudden being flooded with new users. Mm-hmm. But it was a really remarkable experiment and a really amazing feeling. Yeah. Participating in these markets. And another one would be in Thailand in the Asian monetary crisis in the late 90s. I was already living in Asia at the time and was asked to come down to help a community to implement its own community currency in the northeast of Thailand. Still quite far from where Alessandra was, but as you mentioned in what she was saying earlier. All the money had been vacuumed out of the rural areas of Thailand in order to pay Thailand's debts to first world creditors. And so I went into this village and nobody had any Thai baht at all, none. So everyone all around was bartering, and people had put jugs of water in the entrances of their homes, so that if anyone was walking by would be free to take a drink. So there was a jug of water with a cup that was tied by string to it, and we came in with a new form of printed money that we brought up there in a safe and gave people interest-free credit. So unlike cryptocurrencies now, which you basically have to have money to be able to buy, to be able to participate, we were issuing and giving this money out, to citizens who were lining up to receive it. Because it effectively, you could see that money is just a measure. And so saying that you don't have enough money is like saying that you don't have enough centimeters or meters, to measure the relationship and to facilitate the trading between you. And so when you see real life examples of very different ways in which money can operate, then you can see that we can design money in a way that can achieve cooperation and collaboration between people and achieve inclusion and mutual aid, instead of money as only being a function of competition between people.
Thank you. I think this is the perfect point to hand it over to our audience, because I have a million more questions on my sheet, but I think it would be lovely to actually now hear from everybody here. So if you're up for it, this would be a great point to open your camera again, because it's of course always nicer for Stephen and Alessandra to see who they might be talking to. And yeah, raise your hand electronically. Oh, the first person I see here is Peter. So Peter, I'm just gonna, maybe Peter, do you wanna say a few things while people are collecting their thoughts about what resonated with you and how that plays into your vision for the world?
Oh, thank you, Nadia, and hello to everyone, old friends and new friends that I see on this call, in this webinar. It's really great to see so many of you. I've just been enjoying your questions, Nadia, and the answers immensely, and just resonate with everything that is being said, and the sense I have that we're in like a new adventure and an experiment altogether. That what we're talking about is in a process of still a pretty early stage development, and I feel excited about that and seeing how that, being part of moving that forward, even though I'm a lot older than most of you here that I'm looking at. One thing I would say is, just regarding, and this relates to the Congress we'll be moving into, is that what I've become aware of quite recently is that in order to develop and move in the direction we're moving with, for example, new currencies and new developments in general, to what is called a new paradigm, it's insufficient just to focus on one or two aspects, because the present system is so coherent. It's so strong in its coherence, which means if you just focus on one or two aspects, you may develop one or two aspects, but actually the rest of them will pull you back into the present system, which is what we see with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has become a speculative development, whether it was intended to be or not. So people are just going into Bitcoin to make more dollars. So what's really needed right now is to develop many new aspects simultaneously. And that's our experiment with our Money and Business Partnership Congress in April, actually. We have at least, I've counted up 9 new things that we're bringing into a Congress all at the same time. So anybody that joins will have to somehow deal with 9 new things all at the same time, or they won't be able to deal with anything, they'll be moving back. So that's the kind of invitation, and that's the initiative that I feel is needed. And these 9 or more new things are all congruent. So to make a real movement to something new, it has to be congruent, at least as congruent as the present system. So that's my little input here that I'd like to offer, Nadia. I really appreciate it.
And Peter, actually, since you're the first one that I called on, is there any question that is alive in you for either Alessandro or Stephen?
I think your questions have been brilliant. I can't think of another one right now.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, then let's see if there's anybody else here who is going pregnant with something that you'd love to ask. So if you want to, Mark, how do they raise the electronic hand right now? Where has that shifted?
Yeah, there are 2 possible locations for it. If you're on an older version of Zoom, you can click on participants, and there you should see the little blue hand or a button that says raise hand. If you're on a newer version, on the bottom you have a button that says reactions, and there should be the button to raise your hand.
Okay, so let's see if there is anybody who, Manuel, I saw you raised your literal hand. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, well, thank you so much for this incredible interview and this amazing journey that we're on. My question is regarding what it was already a little bit talked about regarding this sovereignty from ourselves and what we as individuals bring forth to this larger picture. And maybe Alessandra or Stephen also, what can the individual do to help this coherence come together?
So I would say that it really comes down to aligning with where every person's natural interests, passions, and, as we like to say, genius is. Because that's actually where, from my perspective, like if we think about an ideal society like years ahead, and we were talking about how people can really be enabled to do that, I think everybody can get the courage, because it takes courage, right, to try and truly align with what's deeper within themselves, like what comes natural, what feels right. I've seen many people going on that journey. I think the impact and sustainability space actually has a lot of that natural passion, whether it's investors or entrepreneurs. And so I think that it's kind of these nice responsibility on an individual level, like to be able to do that, because I think that when we all do that, then actions also come from a better place and people can show up in a way that is genuine.
Stephen, any additional comments?
I think that covers it. I think it covers it really well. Yeah.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Alessandra. Who else has a question? Let's see what's coming up here. Actually, while we're waiting if other people are okay, sorry, I was just looking at the chat if there was something there. But one thing that I would be interested in is how can a different approach to money actually help local economies or local communities? I'd love to know a little bit more about that. And I know that you've already covered a little bit there, Stephen. I wondered, Alessandra, have you seen that in any sort of significant way?
Yeah, for sure. And I love what Stephen talked about at this point. There are various examples out there. I think that, ultimately, for a brief answer, it comes down to creating more efficiencies for these economies, for these communities, right? Efficiencies that they're just not able to capture in a national economy or even internationally with, let's say, the USD. Because when you think about what a blockchain ecosystem enables, and why to have tokens, right? Like why to have tokens? Because we've seen in various waves of expansion of the crypto space that there's tokens for everything. And suddenly, we tokenize air, we tokenize water. But the reality is that it can often just come down to the fact that you're actually enabling a community to be more efficient, to be more value aligned, and therefore to have incentives that work in sync in a way that wouldn't be the case if it's just abstract and larger. So that's what I see. And so, you know, think about a world where we can enable all these local communities to be more efficient. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. Stephen, anything to add? I mean, I know you touched upon this before with your 2 examples.
Yeah, in general, I just say that if anyone who's participating in this session is concerned that this is just, you know, that crypto is only going in the direction of these games and value extraction, like what Peter Koenig was saying earlier about Bitcoin, then you're going to be very surprised. You know, there are many people and many groups, many companies, and quite a lot of money actually being spent in that direction, in the direction of creating these systems that improve the lives of people and improve the environment and so on. So there's a lot of people that are working in the space that are not just there to try and make more money, and we're just a couple of them, and there's many more. So I do, if anyone, you know, if that helps to change anyone's mind, then I encourage them to take a look around, and they just might stumble across some groups that are doing some really amazing things. And yes, we could put some in the chat later,
right,
or for the future. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Stephen.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you know, and I think listening to both of you, what it boils down to is that at the end of the day, technology is a tool, and depending on what consciousness you use it with, it creates a different impact, right? So now I see a number of raised hands, but I was also alerted that Klaus, you've been trying to raise your hand for a while, so I'm going to call on you to unmute yourself.
So, hi.
Hi. Do you have a camera as well, or do you
Camera,
want to?
yes, I have the camera now. So I think it starts now.
You're still dark. Start
No.
talking. Maybe your camera kicks in.
I don't know. It works. I work a lot of with Zoom, but this time not. As I don't know why.
Go ahead. Go ahead with your
on.
question.
I don't know what it is. So yeah, I want Stephen. I know you long time, and I want to add something about systems which are working now. You forgot, for example, Poland. My friend Darius in Poland is really doing a very successful barter club, and he has now 500 companies in and 5,000 end consumers. That's great, yeah. And
yes, absolutely.
And I do the same system here in Berlin. And this is the way here is going local. Start with local, not with international. Yeah, have some connects between Australia and South America. Yeah, that is Bitcoin really. And Peter, good what you were saying, that you said Bitcoin is a speculation object. At the first time when I saw Bitcoin, and I have a Bitcoin account, of course, that was 19...
Klaus, can I interrupt you for a moment? Can you sort of see if you can?
So another point is also maybe you can also look at, Peter knows it, maybe there's a big club in Switzerland. It's called VIA. And I want to know about Peter, what he thinks about VIA currently.
Thank you, Klaus. Peter. You are muted, Peter.
Just very briefly, VIA, of course, is touted as the main promoter originally of alternative or complementary currencies, and is given as the major example. But if you live in Switzerland, and some of you do on this call, you will see that for me, VIA has lost its central spirit, actually. It's now a bank as well, offering higher interest rates than everybody else. So it's still offered as the model, and as the original model, it's excellent for a complementary currency. But let me just say this. Nadia stuck her stake in the ground around the question of your individual relationship to money. And this is the key. These systems lose their energy and lose their spirit if they don't have somebody who's running it who is not addicted to dollars or the conventional currencies and has no aversion to them. And for this, there's inner work is required to reach this state of not being addicted or have an aversion to money in whatever form it is. And my suggestion is, even back to Stephen, is that there are many new initiatives out there which want to do good and are positioning themselves for the good. But the question is, you know, whether their founders have actually reached that state, or whether they say, as so many of the alternative currencies that you know, Stephen, say, well, you know, I'll do this, but I need to have so much money to start off with in traditional dollars or euros or Indonesian or Thai baht before I can actually start my new currency or start my wonderful initiative. And that's what I mean by addiction. There's masses of evidence that new good initiatives that have been founded on the existing fiat currencies and are dependent on them just collapse or implode. And that's where this work that I believe Nadia is talking about is absolutely fundamental. Everybody who starts such a new system, whether it's crypto, non-crypto, wherever, needs to look at their relationship to money to start off with, and their background with money, and be really free of any kind of addiction to run after it like crazy or to push it away from themselves.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, great for putting that same stake into the ground again. I think it's very essential.
It absolutely is, and I've talked about this with Peter and over the past many years as I've been noticing and identifying it and having to engage with it in these issues in my own work. You know, in complementary currencies, or when people start working with money, often it is because they have some forms of issues around it that need to be dealt with, and you find it a lot especially in the hardcore stock traders, you know, or day traders, the mentality of day trading and so on. You can see a lot of work that needs to be done to relieve yourselves of the, you know, to relieve oneself of that kind of mentality. So yeah, it's a recurring theme in what we see even in complementary currencies and in blockchain as well too. So
and it comes back to what Alessandra, you were saying too. I mean, you know, we're not trying to be idealists either. We're living in a practical world where we need to work with the existing system as well, because we're all part of it within its existing, within what we need every day. And so we're not in the new system yet. So we need to appreciate what the present system is doing for us while we're working for the new. So we're not pretending that we're perfect. But we have to be, in my view, we have to be able to see what's what and aspire to advance in terms of our consciousness, individually and collectively. This is where my heart lies, in fact.
Thank you, Peter. Listen, I'm going to call on a few more people who have their hands raised. So I would ask you, for the sake of time, we might not get to everybody, to be concise and to also say if you have a specific person you're directing the question at. Martin, how about you?
Thank you. Yeah, just quite quick and briefly, I just wanted to ask, what can we learn for blockchain and for local currencies from the recently established global currency called the COVID? Because I mean, the virus, money is like a virus, or I mean, it needs hosts to reproduce, it scales up exponentially. We have local currencies called mutations. So, I mean, there are so many things we could compare, and it scaled up, you know, in such a fast amount of time. And I think there's so much we can learn from it, right? Compared to our I would say, very low tech, very primitive ways of dealing with money still. So what do you think? What can we learn from this for money?
Who do you want to ask, Martin?
Maybe Alessandra and Stephen, both.
Alessandra.
Yeah, I was going to say, Stephen, over to you.
Okay.
Sure. Well, it's a tough one, isn't it? I have a school here, and we're really struggling to keep our doors open at a time like this, and it's tough when you see, where I live, we're very dependent on the tourism industry, and no one's allowed to come and visit us right now. So it's a really tough time for a lot of people. On the other hand, there is a lot to be thankful for, and I think the ability to slow down and to not run around so much and to focus more have been of great benefit to people. And I'm seeing a lot of mutual aid going on around me, and I think that maybe you do as well, where you live, where people are more generous with each other, maybe financially as well as perhaps as emotionally. And I certainly see that around me here. And I hope you are as well too. And there may be areas where they're not, and really need to have some healing sent their way.
I mean, I I meant more the logics we can learn from a virus compared to money. Are there logics or things we can observe right now, how a virus behaves and how a monetary system behaves?
I don't exactly know, but the medical metaphor that I usually use is between giving a blood transfusion and CPR. So the economy right now, as a result of government policy, is that the economy is having a heart attack, and the solution that they're proposing is to hook up a transfusion to the economy and start pumping more and more money into it through quantitative easing. But that's not how you treat a heart attack. You treat a heart attack with CPR. You're pressing on the heart and you're getting it to circulate, and so I think that they're going about this all wrong. In terms of parallels with a virus, well, I'm glad that COVID isn't going exponential. I think it's good that it's stabilizing, whereas there's other aspects of the economy that I would like to see people go exponential about. So,
thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Alessandra, any thoughts on your end?
No, I feel that this is something we could talk for a very long time about, so I'll just leave it there.
Okay. And, I was just thinking, Martin, in respect to your question, if we pretended that COVID was a very good idea, then maybe one of the lessons in there is if your idea hits the right point, it can spread in no time, right? So to see it more positively is to really have a competition around ideas and models of ways of being. And if it's solid enough and coherent enough, as Peter was saying earlier, then maybe it can go global in no time. Who knows? Okay, yeah.
To say something about this, I'm struggling here in Berlin to build up locally a network. It is really difficult to go to the shops and say to them, you can a little bit do with parallel currency, 1-to-1 to the euro and so on. It's very difficult. And so as a virus to explode, I don't see. It is really hard work to get the people together. And Darius, my friend in Poland, he is a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson, but he's a salesperson. He could do this and take a phone and then say we make a meeting, and then he explains the things and he get the people in. No?
Klaus, I would love to continue this, and I have two more people who have raised their hand to ask questions, so I'm going to hand over to them. Yeah, and of course, for everybody, we might be running 5 minutes over. If you have to leave on time, you can without feeling rude at all. So Jens, your question, and to whom?
Yes, thank you. First, just a very small thing about a virus. I think money doesn't have anything to do with exponential growth or anything like that. Money has to be connected to the resources, and the resources should be more or less stable or grow or decrease by human nature, by the nature and by the humans. And that's also my question. we talked you talked a lot about individual aspects of money, but the collective aspect and the property aspect of money. If you don't have any property, you're lost to exchange a lot. You have only your personal whatever. So what about this? Maybe I ask Alexandra. Isn't it as important to think about the connection to the resources, to the nature, as to the individual exchange possibilities?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the accountability part that we were talking about earlier today, of like making sure that we have these checks and balances in the system, like across different assets as well, resources, money in different forms, right? And that is something that we haven't quite figured out yet. The good news is that we have the technology for it now. But yeah, I think it goes back to that. And what I'm observing right now is that different industries, and this is really good because different industries are choosing their own approaches to go about it. Like there's some interesting initiatives. And what ultimately leads to is eventually, ideally, to connect the dots between different systems and achieve interoperability so that we can have this sort of universal ledger that avoids negative externalities, which are, negative externalities as in unaccounted for impacts, negative impacts. And so we can't quite get from zero to hero right away, because that would not be a scalable and resilient system anyway, but we're starting to see things happening.
Thank you, Alessandra. So let's go to Ilona as the last question for today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nadja, and thank you, Stephen and Alessandra, for the very interesting inputs. I just had a question for Stephen about the interaction and possible relevance of community alternative complementary currencies and all of this, everything that's made possible and happening with these blockchain technologies. Because I know that at the time I was quite interested in complementary currencies and read a lot about a lot of the local initiatives. And in fact, in my own country, there are some too. And the whole idea behind them is to, well, give more power to local consumers, and especially allow local businesses to stay alive and not go for the cheaper big supermarkets. And is that still something that's possible to embed within systems that go global directly within the design?
I don't think so. Yeah, no, they have to be, I still think they have to be limited in order to prevent that outflow of money. But you can use a global token, but you're still kind of locking the circulation between the people in that network, like if you're using a blockchain technology to do it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're right on the money right now. And I would like to, Alessandra, ask you sort of in a nutshell, one thing that you're walking away with from the conversation today. And then, of course, Stephen, you as well.
I think actually a lot of awareness, a lot of awareness on the topic, and seeing right now the questions, which is always my favorite part, and where people are at. That's exciting. So I would say good awareness about the things that we discussed.
Thank you, Alessandra. And Stephen.
I think just go for it. Take opportunities like this as a sign that that we should be looking at these technologies more, and if it's not just technologies, but the philosophies, theories, and consciousness around it.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you both so much. I feel I learned a ton today about this field, and also in preparing to, ask you halfway sensible questions for this talk today. So I can only say that to access the field of money with that level of curiosity and making it your own is incredibly liberating. And Mark, if I could ask you to just post in the chat, we have a collection of different links. So there are obviously the links to Alessandra's top tier impact group. If you want to look into that, we have to Stephen's group with the complementary currency organization. So you can click on that. There's a link to the Money and Business Partnership Congress that Peter is putting on, and where Ilona is part of our core team and one of the driving forces there. You heard her before. So then please sign up for, at least pre-register for that if you're interested in participating in deepening this conversation. And if you are interested in deepening your own relationship with money and really disentangling, all of these shadowy, weird feelings that you have around money and the greed that might be in you, or the sense of failure, whatever it might be, then join us for the next round of CU Money, which is starting actually at the end of this week, the next English group. Thank you so much for being here. It was amazing having you all. And if you want to unmute yourselves just quickly to say goodbye, have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, and Stephen and Peter and Alessandra, if you could stay on for just a second, that would be great.
Sure.
I know, Alessandra, you have to leave in 2 minutes, so we'll make it very short.
Bye, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.